Great. Yeah, well, I want to welcome you all to this webinar. It's great to see you here this evening. My name is Aurelia and I'm a member of Women's Voice DLR. This webinar is part of the Work for Change series that's offered by Southside Partnership Women's Program. The aim of the series is to provide a space for women to explore social issues that affect our communities and that affect us as women specifically. In the series, we learn from those with expertise or lived experience around a particular issue, and then we engage in conversations with each other. This evening is the first evening in the series, and it is hosted by Women's Voice DLR. Women's Voice DLR is a newly formed group that is passionate about moving society towards gender equality. Unfortunately, we're still far from it. Our aim is to bring women's perspectives and voices to all decision-making tables by developing women's political understanding and also their community engagement. Today, we'll address the unfinished democracy that is Ireland when it comes to women. This has been very much in the foreground for many of us in view of recent events. The format for the evening will be as follows. First, our invited guest, Minister Josepha Madigan, will be speaking to us. This will be followed by questions and answers that can be put to the minister. We will then go into breakout rooms where you have an opportunity to have your say and tell us what you think about what you heard and what your thoughts about are about how we can move forward. And we aim to finish on time at about approximately 8:15. The talk and the questions and answer session will be recorded, but the recording will stop straight after the questions and answers so that you can feel free to participate in the breakout rooms and feel free to say what you think. Please make sure to send your questions for the minister to us during her talk so that we can keep them going. Now, to send us your questions, this is important. Can you please put them in the chat box, but not to everybody, but to, if you go to the drop-down list, it's usually set to everyone. If you go down and go to Q&A, if you select that and then type your question, it will come straight through to us and we make sure that we don't lose any of your questions. Now, I have the honor to introduce our guest speaker, Minister Josepha Madigan. Josepha Madigan is a Fine Gael TD for Dublin Rathdown constituency. She was appointed as Minister of State with responsibility for special education and inclusion in July 2020. Before that, she served as Minister for Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht from 2017 to 2020. And following her election to the Dáil for the first time in 2016, Josepha was appointed to the Fine Gael Government Formation Negotiation Team by former Taoiseach Enda Kenny. She served on the Oireachtas Public Accounts Committee, the Future of Healthcare Committee, and was the chairperson of the Budgetary Oversight Committee. She was a Fine Gael councillor for the Stillorgan ward on the Leary Rathdown County Council from 2014 until her election as a TD. Josepha practiced as a solicitor for 20 years. She won Family Lawyer of the Year at the Irish Law Awards 2014. She's also an author of a handbook for family lawyers and their clients. In 2018, she was appointed as the coordinator for the Fine Gael Yes campaign in the referendum to repeal the Eighth Amendment. She requested the establishment of a special Oireachtas Committee on Gender Equality to consider the very important recommendations of the report of the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality. Her speech in the Dáil on sexual violence against women resonated with women throughout Ireland. During this speech, she said that we are all very much part of the unfinished democracy that is Ireland when it comes to the representation and treatment of women. This spoke directly to the aim of Women's Voice DLR, which is to work towards gender equality and make sure that women's voices are heard. Minister Madigan, thank you so much for being with us here tonight, and I look forward to listening to your talk.
Thank you so much, Aurelia, and thank you to DLR Women's Voice for inviting me to your inaugural event. I'm very honoured and humbled and privileged to be the first speaker at which I hope will be a long-term initiative that you've started. And I just want to commend each and every one of you for doing it. I think it's a voluntary organisation, which makes it even more incredible that you're doing it. And, you know, it's the typical thing: give a busy woman something to do, and she'll do it. And it couldn't come at a more pivotal time, as Aurelia set out there very eloquently. It is, you know, a changing time now. I think in Ireland there's unfortunately been certain incidents recently that I think have, you know, focused our minds in this country as to the inequality that exists for women in Ireland. And it's a strange thing to say because we live in a Western democracy, and there's often the assumption that there is no misogyny, that there is no hidden sexism, but there is. I'm speaking to you now here in Leinster House. I've just spoken in the door on a different matter, and as we were saying before we went live this evening, we only have representation of 22.5% of women. That's 36 women out of 160 in our parliament, which is really just not enough. And if we consider the fact that I think it's something like 54,000 more women actually living in Ireland than men, so we're over 50% of women of the female gender, whether they're girls or women, living in this country, and yet we only have 22.5% representation. That really saddens me. I'm not anti-men, by the way. I live with a husband and two sons, two teenage sons. So I know all about trying to get a woman's voice heard. But it does sadden me. And one of the things I feel really passionate about is Article 41 of the Constitution. I've spoken about this before in the past. And the reason I've spoken about it is because it is our statement of values. It's a living, breathing document, which really shows what our moral fibre is, what we believe as a country, what we say about our Irish people. And that clause in the Constitution it just talks, it really is about inequality, because it says a woman's place is in the home. Now, women, of course, can stay in the home and should stay in the home if they should so wish. But if they don't want to, they shouldn't be forced to do so, first of all. And second of all, they shouldn't feel inadequate if they work outside of the home. And I think by saying, and it is written in black and white, that a woman is neglecting her duties, by working outside the home, I think that is from a very elementary premise, that sort of says to Ireland what it says. And it's completely counterproductive to government policy. And so I just want to say that at the outset, and I will talk a little bit about what I said in the Dáil only a few weeks ago. But that is part of that conversation and part of the narrative that needs to change. Aurelia felt inclined to invite me to speak to all of you today. Really, she said to me on the back of what I said in the Dáil, and you will know that I spoke about sexual assault in the Dáil and the fact that I had been a victim or a survivor, from want of a better word, there is no right word really, of sexual assault. And what was quite incredible when I said that, there were two things. First of all, I completely underestimated the effect that would have on me over the subsequent 48 hours, because when you say something out loud, there's a healing that comes with that. And I had never said it publicly. Now, I didn't have to say exactly what happened to me, but it was the fact that I used my position when we were talking on statements on gender equality in the Dáil, and particularly on domestic and sexual gender-based violence. I used my position to say something. I was completely overwhelmed by the response that I received from people in relation to it. And just strangers would say things to me that had happened to them. And, you know, we know around sexual assault that it can run the gamut from something that might be perceived to be relatively innocuous to something that's much, much more serious. And a few short weeks later, We all know what happened with Ashling Murphy, and the absolute grief and the collective and individual grief that each one of us felt, particularly as women in this country. But I do think the majority of men stand shoulder to shoulder with us. And it's interesting, even in here, even me talking to my ministerial colleagues and talking to other parliamentarians and senators, I think one of the things that struck me is that they wanted to speak on it, but they were so afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I thought that was really interesting, because we don't want to have men in a place where they feel they can say something without somebody saying that's not the right way to say it. We have to keep that conversation, but not just with women, with men as well, because we have to bring them with us. And that goes back to the Article 41 to the Constitution as well, is getting them to understand that that's about equality, and which is part of a bigger, wider conversation. I know Helen McEntee is doing really, really good work around the third national strategy, and she's going to be publishing that over the next few weeks. And that's really going to be important, because there'll be a short public consultation going out on that, where people will be able to give their views, and there's going to be a priority on prevention and on reduction. Like I know, for example, in Dún Laoghaire Rath Down, we don't have a refuge. And in fact, I met the CEO there recently, Frank Kern, who was very aware of it and is working very hard with Tuxtla to try and ensure that we have a refuge. 9 counties throughout Ireland don't have refuges at all. I know Minister McEntee this morning on Morning Ireland said that she would be, I think there's about 140 at the moment, and she's planning to treble that to 400 or even more. And there shouldn't be a situation where 8 women a day are being turned away from accessing these refuges. I mean, it's just not right. And again, what was really interesting on what she said is that, and I don't know if it's a female thing or why it's happening. It's almost like as women, we're afraid to nearly ask, but it's like, unless you go looking for it, it's not going to exist. But that's not the way it should be. It should be automatically provided, rather than somebody having to ask for it. I work with children with additional needs. That's my role. And now we're trying to put in special needs facilities and spaces within schools when they're originally built, so that you don't have to ask for them. The families don't have to, advocate for them. And the same should apply for refuges. So I really hope that will be successful. And I really think she is determined. We've a really good minister in her to kind of get that done. And I think as well, education. Yes, I'm on the area of special education, but I'm still within the Department of Education. I have some influence on talking to Minister Foley around the curriculum, around education in schools, in particular around consent, sex education. We shouldn't be afraid to talk about it, challenging those stereotypes. I talk to my teenage sons. I'm sure you all have children that you talk to as well, or nieces and nephews, about, thorny subjects perhaps that in my day, I only grew up in Foxrock, not in Dún Laoghaire Rath Down myself. My parents wouldn't have talked to me about these subjects. It would have been too embarrassing, or it just didn't arise, and we sort of figured things out for ourselves. But that has to stop now, because we're in a very different era when you think of social media and the access to porn in particular, which to me is one of the root causes, not just violent porn, but porn in general terms. And the internet safety and online safety and all of that has to be looked at. We have to talk about porn. We have to talk about it in a real way, because these sort of attacks that happen don't come from nowhere. And it's sometimes difficult, I think, for people to make that connection between the locker room banter, the WhatsApp group, sort of throwaway comments, all the way up to escalating to cold-blooded murder. But unfortunately there is. And I think most of us as women can kind of put our hands up and say, even if we haven't been sexually harassed or we haven't been sexually assaulted, and I hope most of you haven't been, but most women would have undertaken some form of sexism throughout their lifetimes, and it simply shouldn't happen. So it's really good, I think, and there's a real momentum now to have these topics of conversation, even though they're difficult and they're hard and uncomfortable at times. I sat at Cabinet when we discussed repeal the eighth, I really mentioned that in my bio. And listening to me being 20 years of a lawyer made me feel very, very old. But I remember we were talking around the Cabinet table, and I have to bear in mind that there are 15 Cabinet members and only 4 women. And we were discussing female anatomy, because of repeal the eighth. And, it was just such an uncomfortable conversation that, coming out of men's mouths talking about us. Now it had to be done because we needed to move things forward. And the same applied, in terms of cervical check and the issues with that as well. And women have gone through such a difficult time in this country. It's like in our DNA. It's been embedded in us for many, many years. When you're talking about the mother and baby homes and the institutions and how we were treated by the Catholic Church. I mean, I have never been shy on making my views known on many different female topics. I talked about women priests at one point. I think I was just in Cabinet at the time and was reprimanded for doing so. But I still believe that, and I know this is a separate conversation, I know, but again, it's just about equality and wanting to see women in these leadership roles. We're doing an awful lot, for example, with gender quotas. We're doing a lot on boards. We're doing a lot more on a lot of different kind of policy issues. But it's across all parts of society. It's not just compartmentalized in one particular area. It pervades everywhere. And the divorce referendum was something that I pioneered also, reducing the time from 4 years to 2. And if I left tomorrow, that's probably the proudest thing that I would have done, because it really helped, in particular, women who were really suffering, not having their divorce and not being able to get it sorted. So I was really pleased to bring that to the Irish people, and thankfully the Taoiseach supported me in that, and indeed Francis Fitzgerald, who was the former Minister for Justice, and 81% of the Irish people agreed with us. And repeal the eighth, I think, was in the high 60s as well, and it's great to get those two done. They weren't easy to be the director of elections in those particular referenda, but again, give a busy woman something to do, and she'll get it done. So it was a great result, I think, for Irish women. I've spoken as well about other subjects like female genital mutilation, FGM, which is a really, really, really big problem around the world. It doesn't affect perhaps as many in Ireland, and we kind of sort of keep a distance from it, but it is still here. It's hidden and it's difficult to find. And I think there's only been one conviction. There is legislation in place now, but there are millions of girls around the world who suffer from this barbaric practice. It's something I feel very passionate about, and something that needs to be completely stamped out now. It's just absolutely not acceptable on any level that this happens. And we need women and we need men to talk about it. Can you imagine if that was a man and he was having that done? It just wouldn't simply happen. And again, it's an uncomfortable topic, and that people don't like talking about, but it has to be spoken about. So domestic violence as well. I had, when I was in Cabinet, I'd done a little bit on Safe Ireland and Airbnb providing refuge spaces, just to go back to that. And when the pandemic hit, I was the first person in Cabinet to raise domestic violence because I knew it was going to be a really big issue, and it still is. But I think that we are doing a lot of work. I think the Special Oireachtas Committee, the Citizens Assembly Special Oireachtas Committee, is going to be vital, and it's going to be a real opportunity for us to look at these thorny issues, to discuss them forensically, to interrogate them, to ask ourselves these questions, and see how we can make things better. And as I said earlier, I do think the majority of men are standing with us. Sometimes it's a carrot, sometimes it's a stick, sometimes it's a blunt instrument, like the Gender Pay Information Bill, for example. It seems like a small step. It's a really big step. Now companies have to publish their data. They have, and if there isn't, transparency there, they have to say why there's a gap in pay. So all of these things are incremental, but it's the collective as a whole. And I think the fact that all of these gender equality issues will be dealt with under the one ministry, which is the Ministry for Justice, there'll be cohesion there. It'll be streamlined, and nothing will be done in silos or in isolation, because it has to be done all together, or it just won't work. So look, that's kind of all I really wanted to say. I can go on and on forever about so many different topics, but I thought it might be just maybe more interesting for you if you want to ask me questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Josepha. It was great to hear. I mean, I couldn't agree more with what you've said there. Going through all the obstacles and all the things we're still fighting with, the attitudes, pornography, and all of that. I mean, we have so much work still ahead of us. It's great to hear what you're saying, that so much is being done at the same time, but got so much more to do, and all the challenges. And again, I think the Citizens Assembly recommendations, fantastic, but the question is now, there's so many reports that are gathering dust in shelves. The challenge is now really to do something about it. And they're ambitious. It would be great to see them, realized. But the question is how we're going to do that.
Absolutely is the question, and it was actually me who wrote to the party leaders and asked them on the back of the Citizens Assembly recommendations to set up this Oireachtas committee, which has been chaired by Ivana Bacik, and it'll be, once we get good, which we will, TDs and senators sitting on that. It's a really useful way. It worked for repeal the 8th, for example, which went to referendum. And it'll bring all women's issues to the spotlight, and out into the light so that they can be discussed, and particularly the role of women in politics as well, which I'm quite passionate about as well. And Women for Election talk about the 5 C's, cash, confidence, culture, childcare, candidate, those 5 things that stop women and prohibit women from getting involved in politics. But we absolutely have to have women in here, and at local level as well, because we need that representation.
Oh, absolutely. Now we have a few questions here coming in. Will I just read out the first one out to you? Honourable Minister, what role do male political leaders play or can play towards the agenda of gender justice in Ireland?
I think they have a huge role to play. In some ways, when a man says something in support of a woman, it can actually sometimes have more resonance than a woman saying it. It's like all praise is, self-praise is no praise type of thing. And the difficulty for women sometimes, and I found this myself being in a minority in here, is you can be accused of being too shrill, or accused of just going on about women's issues. So you kind of get put in the box, or that's just being a woman, or that's just, kind of dismissed, or you could become a very, very male-like, because you're surrounded by men so much that you start acting like them and almost morph into them. And I've made a deliberate effort in here to stay feminine, because femininity is a strength, and I think men, as I said earlier, sometimes shy away from talking about women's issues because they're afraid they're going to get it wrong. And we have to encourage them and help them to speak about these issues. I know the Taoiseach wrote a really good article recently, I think it was in the Irish Mirror, no, the Irish Sun actually, and about how sometimes he didn't realise that he was being, not misogynistic, but that he perhaps didn't notice things, so you could be in a room as a woman and everybody's a man, and you say something which is worthwhile, or your contribution is worthwhile, but they'll actually give credit to the man who says it after you and kind of forget that you said it at all. And I've sat in those occasions and said to myself, I think I actually said that earlier. But you kind of let it go, because if you start to complain about it, then you're getting attention for the wrong reason. So it's sort of trying to navigate that arena, and I think for me, it was helpful being a bit older, you know, going into politics. I was in my mid 40s, which was a good time because I'd had the background of family law, which is a very, you know, tough environment. So I wasn't afraid of people, you know, shouting at me or men's views or anything like that. And maybe I mightn't have been so good when I was younger. That's not to say that we don't need young women, because we do. But it certainly was an asset. But no, but to answer your question really in a long-winded way, it absolutely needs men speaking on our behalf, and they have a huge, huge role to play. And hopefully, I actually don't think they're going to have much choice, to be honest, now, because there's so much happening. I think they're going to have to talk about it. And you know, and it'll be, you know, and for men as well, it's hard in the gender quotas, because like there's now an onus on all parties to have 30% of women in a general election on the ticket, so up for election, and it'll be 40% of the next general election. Now, there are some men who won't like that, because they'll say, oh, a woman's only getting on the ticket because she's a woman. Now, that is the case, but just because she's on the ticket doesn't mean she'll get elected, but she's been given the opportunity to get elected. You know, and unfortunately, again, it's a blunt instrument. We have to keep gender quotas until we don't need them. But at the moment, we do need them, because we just don't have sufficient women representing all of us. So that's the issue there.
Yeah, thank you. No, I absolutely agree. You know, absolutely. We need now look forward to the quotas and to it all changing, because if we don't get the women through, we'll stay at 22.5% of women representation in the Dáil. So absolutely. And I think everybody has that experience that you say something in a room, and when a woman says it, often it's nothing. That's the culture. I think that's the C you mentioned in the 5 C's, you know, and that really is something we have to work towards. And hopefully with the gender quota, that will change, because hopefully women will be heard more, and then they realize that we are equal, and women's voices should be given equal importance, you know, as males. So hopefully that will help to shift. Now I have another question. Oh, sorry, before I go to the next question, if anybody wants to put a question, please don't forget to put your questions. You can also put them in the chat box, I think, but ideally to Q&A, but please put your questions into the chat box. The next question is, what can you do for foreign women and associations that help foreign women to have their voice heard?
Well, again, that's something that's really critical. My own personal view in Ireland is we don't have enough minorities. We don't have enough immigrants. I think we can have a really parochial view actually in this country, because we're on an island, and we're kind of insulated a little bit. And I think we need to do more of that. There is a lot of work that's been done, again, in the Department of Justice, or possibly under Roderick O'Gorman, who's the Green Minister for Equality, around these issues. There's a lot of strategies and plans there to include people's voices, but I would like to see more not just women, but more candidates from, you know, with different backgrounds and different ethnicities standing for the Dáil, standing for the local election. We do see some of them coming through, but not in sufficient numbers. And you know, I guess part of it is, you know, I suppose government can only do so much, or the legislative body, the body politic can only do so much as well. It's about communities supporting a candidate as well, getting them involved, or even standing as an independent. You could be a non-party as well. But you need that support, and those 5 C's that I mentioned, childcare, cash, competence, culture, candidate, they're all vitally important to support somebody in that role. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And not just as a token, absolutely. You need support, because often I think women are putting forward as a token last minute, and they don't have the support behind them, and then they can't succeed. So absolutely have the supports behind them.
But I mean,
sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, you know, I just think it's really interesting. You know, I mean, in 1918 was when our very first female cabinet minister was elected. That was Countess Markievicz, who actually represented part of the constituency I represent now. And so that was the very first Dáil in Ireland. And then in the second Dáil, we had an extra 5 women. And we're now in the 33rd Dáil, and we only have 36. So in over 100 years, we've only increased by about 30. You know, so if you compare that to about 5,000 men in comparison. Really see it in spectacular colour, and so that's why we have to try and support as much as we can, anybody who wishes to stand.
Absolutely. And often these women weren't celebrated. It's only starting now that we're really aware of all the women that came before us and that, passed away for us. The next question is, what are your views on providing women safety helplines to protect women as an intermediate measure?
I completely agree with that. And in fact, I was on Ireland AM a few weeks ago, and one of the things that I called for is a dedicated helpline, that the Gardaí would set up a dedicated helpline, because you might recall there was a bit of controversy around the fact that some 999 calls weren't being answered during the pandemic for domestic violence, which went up by 40% during the pandemic. So I asked that they would set up a dedicated helpline. Now, I haven't heard back yet with any proper answer as to why they won't, because it should always be the case, no more than a woman getting the half payment immediately if she needs it, if she's trying to flee a bad situation. And in fact, there's an argument that they shouldn't have to flee at all, that they should be able to stay in the home and the perpetrator leave. But there should be a dedicated helpline. I mean, it was interesting. I think I launched the Rape Crisis Centre annual report at the end of last year, and they were saying so many women ring, but there's just silence at the end of the line because they haven't quite found the courage to literally use their voice yet. And that dedicated helpline, I don't know, I'm sure they have a way of people that could talk to people who are in those situations when it's very difficult and coax the information from them in a gentle way and be able to help them. So no, I'm absolutely for that. I agree with it. Yeah. And I do think as well, that victim care strategy is really, really, really imperative that it's done correctly. I know Sarah Grace, I know we had the Sarah Everard case over in London, but there was another lady, Sarah Grace, who actually happens to be a solicitor, who suffered a heinous attack here in Dublin, and she survived, thankfully, but she spoke about her journey through the criminal justice system and what she had to endure and how inadequate the victim care strategy is. And I know Minister McEntee has a lot of good work that she's going to do around that, but like her she went to counselling, for example, and her counselling notes were used against her in court. That shouldn't happen. There was no screen between her and the perpetrator, and when she had to give evidence. We have to implement the supporting of a women's journey, which have never actually been done, and it needs to be done, and it needs to be done yesterday. So we don't want women re-traumatized again and again when they have to go back into court. I have spoken before around the family justice system, because I represented so many women separating and men separating and divorcing, and the court system itself is so adversarial. It's just not designed really for that particular purpose. There has to be a different way of doing it, and that's why I called for a dedicated family court. Just as I think the criminal justice system should have a special type of court system for victims and survivors.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You mentioned Article 41 earlier, and there's a question: is the plan to amend Article 41, or will it be abolished in total?
Well, that is the $6 million question. The Special Rapporteurs Committee will be tasked to look at and to decide what to do. I personally favour some sort of gender neutral language. There's also a role there for carers. Or else just delete it in its entirety. I'm not sure. I think it's kind of superfluous to requirements. I'm not sure, if it actually, well, as it stands, it doesn't add anything. It's completely archaic and anachronistic. It doesn't help women's cause in any form or manner. But I think a gender neutral. There are more men who stay at home and look after children as well. Or it could be a flexible arrangement. So something that just doesn't, penalise women in that sense, or make us feel different to men in that space.
Yeah, thank you. Now, there's another question. What is your view on gender quotas for women in politics, such as in EU countries, and do they work? You mentioned it earlier. You mentioned the quotas. Do they work?
They do work. I think they do work. Now, I would like to see some data collected on how many women who are put on a ticket as a part of the gender quota actually get elected. That's the first thing I'd like to see. And the second thing I'd like to see is how many women leave Dáil Éireann after the first term. Because I do believe there's quite a lot of them. And I'd like to know why that is the case. When I entered politics, as I said, I've been a lawyer, as you know, or either you read it out earlier, I've been a lawyer for 20 years. Decided I wanted to make a difference in society for my sins. And I wasn't involved in a political party. And I decided to campaign for Livy Mitchell, who was a former TD in Dublin South, Dublin Down, canvass for her. And then I ran as a local election candidate, and then she was resigning her seat, and there was a space for another person on the ticket with Annan Shatter, who was the former Minister for Justice. And I got on that ticket because I was a woman, and I was a gender quota. And I have to say, for me, it was so difficult to accept because I believe in a meritocracy. And I have always got things in my own, on my own bat, if you like, not because I'm female, because of hard work, etc., etc. But it was an opportunity. And I said, I'll take the opportunity. Now, because of that, there was a male candidate who didn't get on the ticket. Now, he subsequently did, and he's a great TD. But I did get elected then. But obviously, as I said earlier, just because you're on the ticket doesn't mean you get elected, and I've subsequently been re-elected. But I would never have had that opportunity otherwise. And Fine Gael selected me. Other parties select candidates all of the time, and often it's really, really difficult to get women, to stand for election. Like the 40% gender quota now for the next general election is going to be very hard, to get. Like, we have, I think, more females in Fine Gael than a lot of other parties, but it's difficult. So gender quotas have to be there, I think. You mentioned yourself earlier, Aurelia, until they're not needed. So they're a necessary evil right now. That's my view.
Yeah, thank you. And as you said, it would be interesting to see what makes it so difficult for women to go forward, or then if they're in, not staying there. And you mentioned the C's, the 5 C's, that really probably need to be changed to achieve that. Another question here, what do you think about removing the perpetrator from the home instead of the victim that has to flee with her children? It is done in other countries.
Yes, and I touched on that earlier on. Obviously, I would have represented clients in my previous role as a solicitor, with domestic violence applications, the foreign orders, safety orders, protection orders, and that's a very different thing. Because obviously the guards can be informed immediately if that's breached in any way. But yeah, I and in fact, I think Anna McEntee mentioned it this morning as well in her interview, that is something that will be considered. Whether the woman, why should the woman have to leave? I completely agree with that. But I can also understand from a practical level why they do, and why the onus is put on them, because they're trying to get away from the situation. To politely ask the perpetrator to leave probably isn't going to work. So I don't know how it would work on a practical level. Certainly on principle, though, absolutely I agree with it. Yeah.
No, I think that was pretty much it. A question that sort of comes partly from our group is, what can we do on community level to, further gender equality?
Well, first of all, I think, community is local. It's, it was interesting. There was an article in the Irish Times there a few weeks ago about councillors, local councillors, and how they became councillors. And something like 60% of the men have been involved in a GAA club, the soccer club, or the rugby club. So they're involved in the sports organisation. So they would have all of that camaraderie and all of that assistance and support to them. But us as women, and this goes to the 5 C's, and it's about community and gender equality. But childcare is a big issue for women. And if it's not childcare, it's elder care or sibling care, or we're always looking after people and minding people. I don't know if you've ever read Hillary Clinton's book, but I'm not sure of the name of it now, but I remember reading it a few years ago, and she talked about emotional labour. And I was in cabinet at the time, and I completely identified with what she was saying, because it's that little thing when you come home. Like last week, for example, I got home at midnight, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and yet I was still going to the freezer, going, can I take meat out for tomorrow? Or the birthday present for these little things, the emotional labor, they're the things that take up time. Is there food for the dog? And these are the things that women think of. So on a community level, it's hard for us to get involved in the community, when you're child rearing, or when you're doing this, just not enough hours in the day. And again, I go back to the Constitution for that, because I think that we change things, we can become a more equal society, and more progressive in that sense. And I think women sometimes, the confidence is a big issue as well, and it's not so much that they're afraid of public speaking. In my experience from talking to them, it's more that they feel, that they just don't have the right networks there, with political networks, or they don't know kind of where to go. But I started in politics. What I didn't look in hindsight, I was setting the stones, or the stepping stones, even though I didn't know it at the time. But I was involved in the Parents Association, the local school. My husband was coaching in soccer and in GAA. I was involved in the parish. I used to read there once a month. I still read there once a month. So we had all the sort of the stepping stones to increasing your profile there. But community is it depends, I suppose, what lens you're looking through, Aurelia, and whether you wanted to go into public life, or whether you want to support someone. But one thing I found as well, and I'd say this honestly, sometimes women don't always support women when they're going forward, and that can be difficult. Men are great at that. Like when you're out canvassing for an election, and I'm not talking per se about myself, I'm talking in general terms. I've spoken to other women about this. You'll have throngs of men out campaigning for that woman, and dropping leaflets and putting up posters and everything. And women don't get that same group. And it's not that the women don't support them, it's that they don't have the time. They literally don't have time, because they're so busy. So that's a kind of a cultural change, a societal change that will happen over time, I think. It's great to see women involved in the community, in whatever level it is, because we really need them there. And we have a lot of empathy and compassion and understanding for each other. And I think it's not that we're any better, we just do things differently. And I think our voice is very valued.
It was very interesting what you said there about women not getting as many women to go out to support them because of other duties. What I found interesting was during COVID, all the reports now, how women were affected differently because they had all much more of the household chores, looking after children. And now going forward, they might have problems with their careers if they stay at home and are not going to workplace. So absolutely, I think that throughout, it's in the community and in so many women's lives, that the problem of having more of the caring duties than men do.
Now, interestingly, in Donnelly Wet Down, I keep going back to the political part. I don't mean to do that, but interestingly, we have the highest amount of female councillors in Donnelly Wet Down, which is really good. We're at 48%. So that's a really good indicator for the kind of county we're living in, and we should be very proud of that. Dublin City, I think, is 41%, and Kildare is 40%. So we're at the top out of all of the 31 local authorities in Ireland. So I think we should pat ourselves on the back for that, and testament to the people who elected them, more to the point. But like in total, we only have about 25% of women in local government, which is below the EU average, which is about 32%. So we are below there, but community, it was great to see councillors getting involved in the community as women, because we know we're great at getting things done.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Minister Madigan. It was really nice to talk to you this evening, and very insightful. And as you said, hopefully it looks like things are moving forward, and hopefully we as women, Voice DLR, will be able to contribute to it. So thank you so much. We're now going into breakout rooms. So I hope you can all stay for it. You'll be allocated into a breakout room, and thank you.